Very excited for this one. We are joined by Brandel Chamblee, a guy who needs no introduction. Second time on the show. You were on the show last year in one of our first episodes, so I really thank you for that. I'm very appreciative. I'm calling this Big Topics with Brandel. You know, you're on television all the time, and you're diving through the minutia of this statistic and that statistic. We're going to zoom out a little bit and kind of catch up on some of the bigger topics that I think are dominating the discourse in golf today. So, first one, we are moving into the Florida Swing. And, we've got the Arnold Palmer Invitational. We get the Cognizant this week, then Arnold Palmer, then the Players. Now, you said that the Players Championship is already a major and that it's the hardest one to win. I don't necessarily doubt that it's the hardest one to win given the field strength. But how can something be a major if it's only open to PGA Tour players?
I don't know that it is open. They don't have any provisions that it allows for DP World Tour players to play their way in. Do they not?
I think they've is there maybe like a top 100 in the world example? Well, basically what I'm getting at is how can you have a major championship, without Jon Rahm or Bryson DeChambeau?
I see your point. Of course, the provisions, should it become a major championship, should work to include the top ranked players in the world, regardless of where they play. It's obviously not currently recognized as a major championship, but in my eyes, over the duration of the Players' Championship, particularly since it moved to the TPC Sawgrass, it has, and I look at Data Golf because the official World Golf rankings are not the best source to look at who's most likely to play well next week. There are all kinds of flaws in the official World Golf rankings that are not there in Data Golf. Data Golf consistently ranks the TPC or the Players' Championship as the best field in golf. And then from a difficulty of golf course, from a shot value standpoint, I think it's a tremendous golf course. And based upon, Tiger Woods successfully defended 24 times in his career, which is an amazing statistic. But he never did it at the Players' Championship. He only won 2 of them. And there's only been one player who ever has successfully defended it. So, these are objective criteria, but I would argue that if a major championship is defined by, yes, history and legacy and tradition, but also it should be defined by who annually plays, which tournament annually has the best field, and which tournament annually tests the best field with the most stringent test. And, at a bare minimum, that's what major championships should do. And they do it. I mean, most of the major championships give us the toughest golf courses of the year, but they don't give us the best fields, and the Players' Championship does that.
So I agree. So if the players, because they're obviously pushing this, March is going to be major, right? There's this new marketing campaign. I'm seeing all these, right? They got to invite the top 5 live. Like, wouldn't that be such a flex to say, hey, we've got this incredible tournament. I know all of you want to play. You guys are invited.
Yeah, they'll figure out a way to do that if, in fact, they do make it a major, which they have the power to do. They could just say it's a major championship. Nobody, yes, of course, there would be some arguing and bitter discussions going back and forth. But in time, it would elevate that tournament to the status of a major championship, which would add another phenomenal week to the PGA Tour. And at any one time, there's been upwards of 7 major championships in the men's game. 7. It wasn't that long ago that there were 6. So this debate about there should only be 4, there's always been 4 is flawed. There's far from there's always been 4. There was 1, and then 2, then 3, 4, then 5, 6, then 7, and then 6, and then somewhere in the mid '90s they just took Jack Nicklaus's amateur championships away from him and said, "You're back to 18. You no longer have 20." The numbers always evolved. And I don't know why we're hard and fast set on 4 major championships. When one, clearly, we're never going to duplicate the aesthetics or the drama of the back 9 at Augusta National. I get it. We're there to celebrate the legacy of Bobby Jones. There's nothing like the Masters. Similarly, there's nothing as difficult as the U.S. Open. The Open pays homage to the roots of the game of golf. The PGA pays homage to golf professionals. They all have their unique characteristics, which make them indelible to us. But the Players, in my view, stands above the others in terms of annually testing the best field with a golf course that more completely tests the players without in any way, shape, or form manipulating the setup of the golf course. It's not long. They don't rely on thick rough. They don't have a 1 week only setup. And annually, it provides a stringent and thorough test to the best players of golf. And then as a kicker, I think from a nerve standpoint, it puts them on edge almost unlike any other venue. Maybe you could find some venues that offer a nerve test similar to playing 17 and 18 coming down the stretch. Yeah, of course, I'm sure you could. But year in and year out, you can't deny that is a nerve-wracking test.
Absolutely. You mentioned that the course has flummoxed a lot of the, people haven't been able to defend there. I was looking at a stat the other day. Riviera, okay? So Riviera, Tiger Woods, Scotty Scheffler, and Rory McIlroy have now combined to make 29 starts at Riviera without a victory. The next highest course on that list is TPC Southwind. At 17, I think it is combined start. Any idea why Riviera has like had this vexing effect on the best players of our generation?
Well, with Tiger, I think as it relates to Tiger, and Phil did win there. I think it's a difficult golf course to come out of the trees on because you can't run it up to Kikuyu. It's not conducive to that style of scrambling, and I think it's also a tribute. As much as I've had fun debating some no laying up guys. They're smart guys. They know their golf. I've had fun debating, at least on social media here and there, and in person, some of the fried egg guys about the importance of angles. That my point is nobody's good enough to chase an angle. You end up with an angle by accident. Nobody is good enough to chase an angle. Nobody would risk a dispersion cone of their misses to gain an angle. Nobody would. But I'm not saying that angle is not important at Riviera. It depends on the right at 3, and you drive it in the right rough, and you go anywhere near that, you're not going to hit that green. You're just not going to hit it. If you're down the left side, you got a chance to hit it. The greens are so small and so protective. And I don't, with Scotty, I'd say it's a small sample size. If he played there 10 times, Scotty's going to win 3 of them at this point. I say it's a small sample size. Rory drives it in the rough a lot, and he's not great out of the rough. Tiger drove it in the rough a lot, and I'd say it's hard to scramble at Riviera out of the rough. You can't run it up in Kikuyu. You hit it short, it stops. You land it on the green, it goes over. So, those are about the only way I think you could argue that point. Having said that, Tiger played some good golf there. I think it's more important or more bizarre to me that Jack Nicklaus didn't win there. Because Jack, again, we don't have data. I wish we did. But just on the data we have from him from 1980, nobody's ever hit it as long or as straight as Jack Nicklaus. And that, by a long way, includes Tiger Woods and Scotty Scheffler and any other great driver that you could throw up in the last almost 50 years.
What did you make of Anthony Kim's victory? I know you have been, and I admire your sort of moral courage and how strong you've been on the live issue. That story seemed to supersede the live dialogue, and I think the reason why is because it wasn't really about live. It was heart. It was about it was a human story, and so I feel like that was Liv's biggest moment. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, without question, I think it was. I think everybody loves an underdog story, and you'd be hard pressed to find a bigger underdog than him. Addiction, demons, self-sabotage, you name it. He seems to have gone through it all. And then when he got out there, he was dead last. There's always been a sort of a fascination with him because he had a bravado about him. He used to work with the same coach that I worked with, Adam Schreiber. I remember being on the range once, hitting balls at PGA West on the back of the range with Adam, and Adam said to me, "You got to come watch this." I think he was 11 at the time, 11 or 12 years old. "You got to come watch this little kid that I'm working with." And I went over and I stood behind him, and he hit, several tee shots, and he turned around and said, "Who's going to beat me?" And
as an 11-year-old kid, and you're playing on the big tour at this point?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd have been, I don't know, 60th in the world or something at this point, or 50th in the world, 50, somewhere in there. I mean, I was playing some good golf at this time. And I can remember thinking to myself, I didn't play golf at 11 or 12, but I can remember being on the range when I got invited to play Colonial when I was 19 or 20. 20. I got invited to play Colonial. I can remember being on the range, and I mean, I thought I was a hell of a player then. I was in the top 5 amateur ranked players in the country. I couldn't imagine saying something like that to a
That's a
freshman.
crazy thing to say.
And I mean, he didn't know me from Adam, but the bravado, and I just thought, well, and look, I mean, bravado was, if you can back it up, and he could back it up. I mean, he was a very good player. He was an exciting player. But he fought his demons, and not everybody's blessed with a great environment to grow up in. And if you are, you hit the lottery, if you've got good parents and a good place to grow up and a stable environment, you hit the lottery. And I don't know that he did. And, that echoes into the future. And so for him to turn his life around and come back and win the way he won, I think it resonated. I'm never. It's never going to change the way I feel about Liv or where the money comes from or the fact that they are legitimizing just a horrific regime through their efforts. I don't think there's anything valorous about that. But the actual comeback story of what he did resonated. It's Liv is what it is. It's not a strong field. I mean, you can just look at data golf. That field was 1/4 as strong as the AT&T. But coming down the stretch, Rahm was in the mix and Bryson DeChambeau was in the mix. So I understand why it resonated. And it was look, never quit. I think that's what he said afterwards. Of course, that's a great message. I always say that whenever I talk to young kids and they ask what it takes to get on the PGA Tour, I'm like, well, talent is kind of a given. But really it's just perseverance. You want to get on the PGA Tour, you just cannot quit. And you have to have a very high level of frustration tolerance. And it appears that, he was playing for a higher purpose with his daughter and his wife and his family. So on a lot of levels, it resonated.
How do you feel about the direction that the PGA Tour is taking? Obviously, it already looks a lot different than when you were playing. It's going to continue to look even more different. Whispers of starting after the Super Bowl and 20 events that all count the same. And, we're moving to this almost like F1 model of like a traveling thing that's kind of, less mom and pop and more of a kind of every event trying to be big. Is something lost with that? Or is that just kind of a unavoidable, evolution of the sports media landscape?
Well, I mean, the media contracts go through 2029. So I don't know how they could just unilaterally decide they're going to take away a certain menu of items that the media have paid for without a huge refund to their media partners. I don't know that they can do that, but maybe they work that out to where there is such a huge refund. And on their side, look, I am always quick to compliment the intellectual pool that is now at the helm of the PGA Tour. Brian Rollback comes in having achieved great success in his team. The SSG, you look at what Fenway Sports has done, you look at what Arthur Blank has done, Steve Cohen has done. You cannot deny that they've been monstrously successful at creating value in sports leagues. But and their model of scarcity has certainly worked there, and they're it sounds like they're trying to create the same sort of scarcity environment at the PGA Tour. I would argue that the PGA Tour is different than every other sport. You watch every other sport for purely entertainment reasons. Nobody's watching Tom Brady throw a football trying to figure out if they can throw a football better. Nobody's watching anybody bat trying to remember how they see if they can bat better. Or nobody's watching Steph Curry and going out and trying to work on their three. Nobody's doing it. Yeah, a few hundred people in college sports or high school sports, maybe, but nobody's doing that. Every single person who's watching a golf tournament is watching it not just for entertainment, but also for participatory reasons. So golf is a different sport, and the level of play, the density of talent is much, much more compacted in golf than any other sport. The difference between the best quarterback and the average quarterback and the worst quarterback in the NFL is about 20 to 40%.
I mean, it's massive. You can see, like, when the Broncos lose Bo Nix, it's like it's over.
Well, go just look at the completion percentages. Go back at the quarterback rating percentage. Look at any metric you want, Now go look at the scoring average of Scotty Scheffler and whoever's 100th in scoring average and whoever's last. And it's 3%, 3.5%, 7%. And the pipelines need to be kept open to whatever degree they reduce the number of tour cards, to whatever degree they reduce the size of fields, to whatever degree they reduce the number of tournaments. They are guaranteeing to deliver a less competitive product to the audience. They're guaranteeing it. It's easier to win a tournament with 100 players than it is 150. Easier to win one with 70 than 120. You go back and look at the WGCs, and essentially that's the model that I hear them. If it were just WGCs, why did Tiger win about half of them when his overall tour win percentage was 22%? The WGCs lost value. They lost the interest. You were watching, there were no comeback stories. You were watching the same players play week in and week out, year in and year out. And they lost the novelty of the Jake Knapps that come along, that pop up out of nowhere. The Jacob Bridgmans that come along that pop up out of nowhere. Because golf is so compacted with talent, the pipelines are important. And so they're talking about scarcity. And, they should, in my view, the opposite should be true. As long as the last man in a golf tournament can win, or last woman in a golf tournament could win, you should be trying to expand the product, not reduce it, in my view. But again, these guys are really smart. I love the players that are on the PGA Tour Policy Board. They're all thoughtful, smart people. So I'm in a wait and see mode, but with some caveats and apprehensions.
I'll tell you my issue with the WGCs. The first two rounds were just so sleepy. And I have been, a big proponent of the cut. I think the cut is a unique thing that we have in our sport. You got a tournament within a tournament. Just look last week, right? Scotty Scheffler trying to keep his streak alive. He fist pumps after making, a 6-footer for par on the last hole. If there's no cut, he's not fist pumping that putt. Isn't something lost if we get rid of cuts?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, would we have cared if he made that putt if there was no cut? Not at all. And it ended up being this fantastic moment. That day, I think I did Golf Central that night, and there was this young Kenyan by the name of Kabugu who eagled the last hole to make the cut at the Kenyan event. And then there was Scotty Scheffler who air punched to make the cut at the Genesis. And I just juxtaposed the two. And I'm like, this is what the world of professional golf is about. On Friday, this is drama. This was Friday, and it felt like a Sunday with those two moments. And yes, the cut I think is very important. I mean, Tiger's said as much, Jack has said as much, and maybe the number they're going to settle on is 125 players. 20 events a year is what they're shooting for, and some kind of cut. But I would argue that, first of all, how can the game be bursting at the seams recreationally? You're a golfer. You know this. It's bursting at the seams. It's almost impossible just spur of the moment to go play golf somewhere. Costs a fortune because the product is in such demand. Viewership is up. People are loving the game. We've got a dominant superstar. I think it's a solution looking for a problem, personally. I don't see the problem with the game of golf, other than the fact that, private equity guys want a liquidity event to 10x their money. So I'm a little nervous that in the quest to create a big profit, which now, because tour players are equity stakeholders, and this is one of the reasons why I think it's in their best interest to make the players a major, because that would increase the value of the PGA Tour. They're looking for a liquidity event somewhere down the road. And to do that, maybe they do need to reduce the size of golf tournaments or the number of golf tournaments and treat each golf tournament as a franchise and try to create value within that franchise. That sounds to me like what their model is. But the idea of having 20 select golf tournaments is really nothing new in the game of golf. The game of golf always had the majors since the mid 70s, the Players. It had the World Series of Golf. It had the Invitationals, which was the Memorial, the Arnold Palmer Invitational, Colonial, to some extent the Byron Nelson. It had the Western Open, the Tournament of Champions. It had tournaments where everybody played, the Doral and the Hope and the AT&T. You add all those up, and those were, quote unquote, the elevated events. And then the secondary events, the BC Opens, the Quad Cities, the Hawaiian Open, Tucson, Memphis, Bank of Boston Classic, Vegas, Hattiesburg, Cajun Classic. it's always had this two-tiered system. And from a scarcity standpoint, the stars have always been scarce. Jack from 62 to 86 averaged 16 tournaments a year. 16 tournaments. That means he had 36 weeks off. You want an off season? They got it. They just break it up throughout the year. 36 weeks off. Tiger Woods, on average, did he play 17 tournaments in his prime? So he similarly had 2/3 of the year off. That's an off season. He just breaks it up. And golf's not a physical sport where they need to rehabilitate the same way they do in basketball or maybe baseball, but certainly football. It doesn't have that kind of wrecking nature on the body.
So you mentioned Brian Rollback and the new PGA Tour leadership. How do you think history will look back on Jay Monahan's tenure?
That he probably got some of the worst breaks in the history of golf. Look, descended upon him was Live. Okay, we can debate in a minute about how you handle that or could have handled it, and then COVID. I mean, those are 1-2 punches that you could have never ever conceived of. And people are saying, well, he could have handled Live better. Okay, maybe. But if you're the CEO of BMW and Mercedes says, we're going to keep building amazing cars, but we're going to give them away for free. Guess what you're not doing? Selling any BMWs. And now, is he a crappy CEO because he actually cares about making a profit or a legitimate return? I mean, it's hard to criticize somebody who is competing with an irrational actor in the sport, and that's what Jay Monahan was dealt with. When you look at or had to deal with when you look at past commissioners, Dean's going to always be tough to beat. I mean, Dean was a visionary, a monumental visionary. The retirement plan, stadium golf, the Ben Hogan tour. These were Dean Beeman initiatives. Tim Fincham, similarly, he was a players commissioner. He really was a very bright man. Jay Monahan had a tough act to follow. And then on top of that, he got 2 500-year floods that you could have never predicted thrown in his face. And I've never met anybody that knows Jay doesn't think the world of him. And I go to the TPC occasionally just with groups, and I talk to the staff, and they absolutely love Jay Monahan as a leader. So I don't know that history will treat him well, and I don't know that that's fair.
So moving topics, Tiger obviously is in a decision process about this Ryder Cup captaincy. I said on the show a couple of weeks ago, it doesn't feel like the right time with how much he's doing with the PGA Tour. He's building his Sunday Red brand. It's Charlie's last year, at home before he goes off to Florida State. And I've also said, he's going to do it once, right? So timing is everything. Do you think Tiger should take the captaincy, or does it make more sense for him to wait to 2029 when it's at home, when Charlie's off to college?
Yeah, I think the next captain should be Justin Leonard. Tiger's got plenty of time to be the next captain or to be a captain, and he should probably do it more than once. I think he's too busy with the governance of the PGA Tour. You mentioned Charlie being at home. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. I think he probably wants to play a little on the PGA Tour champions. He's got bigger fish to fry right now than taking over the Ryder Cup. And the right thing to do is to make Justin Leonard the captain. They missed the boat when they did it with Larry Nelson. And, they tried to pay homage to Larry this past year, and I'm sure it meant a lot to Larry. But it was too little too late as it relates to Larry. And with Justin, you tell me an American player, because we don't have heroes in the Ryder Cup, but you tell me an American player that has hit a more memorable shot than Justin Leonard. Justin Leonard won the U.S. Amateur, the NCAA Major Championship, the Players Championship, has handled himself with class, is really thoughtful. He comes closest in all of those sort of metrics, in tangibles and intangibles, to being Paul McGinley to me. And, Paul McGinley, Luke Donald, Europe has been blessed with a lot of great captains. But that's who Justin Leonard is to me. And there's one clear choice for the next Ryder Cup captain, and it's Justin Leonard, because clearly Tiger Woods is not there yet. If Tiger Woods were there yet, of course, Tiger Woods should get it in perpetuity as long as he wants it. But I just think he's too busy with the governance of the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I tend to agree. So you've been an outspoken critic, or I guess opposing the rollback, and I was I don't know what's wrong with my voice today. I was initially on that side, and then I've kind of changed in recent years. I just feel like with the eye test, what my eyes see. So there's been 6 events on the PGA Tour so far this year. The winning score is -16, -27, -23, -16, -22, -18. And I know you've made arguments that sports evolve and sports change, and there are different ways that you can limit the best players in the world with architecture and with design and with setups. Is there anything that you could see that would change your mind?
That's a good question. I feel like the rollback. Let me see if I can. Is there anything that I would see that would change? Yes. Yes. If I saw that the game disproportionately rewarded wedges over long irons, if I saw that the game no longer it was important to hit it long and straight. It's still very important to hit it long and straight. And the most important aspect of the game are the longest irons, the longest approach shots. Those are still the most important aspects of the game. If I saw that those two were taken away from the game, yeah, I feel like the rollback is, and this is the power of one hole in golf. I feel like the rollback is about one hole in golf and one hole only.
13th at Augusta?
That's right. You know, there's such a, we are all of us so invested in the back nine at Augusta National. And in particular at the 13th hole. So many, and the word is momentous. It should be a momentous decision. So many momentous moments have happened there in that stretch of golf. And the course is sort of landlocked, you know, it backs up against Augusta Country Club. And the idea of watching people hit wedges in there. And you know, Augusta National, the one thing it's always done is maybe better than any other course on the planet is evolve with the advances in technology and the game. But in violet is the architecture of that hole. You know, it was, I think Bobby Jones said, the first hole he discovered on the property. It was just laying there waiting to be discovered. So it means so much. You know, if Augusta National just had a golf ball for Augusta National, that would be fine. That would be fine. You know, I don't know how difficult that would be to do. You got to play this particular golf ball. Maybe the players would be in an uproar over it because, you know, they're all tailor-made specifics to their game. But the game, I used to be, and I still am, by the way, I would be for bifurcation. Bifurcation makes the most sense. I don't see any
So you'd be okay with the, like, you know, similar to baseball, right? You get to a certain level, you play with the wooden bats, you play with the pro ball.
Yeah, but the thing is, here's the thing about bifurcation. These are the problems of it, is that tour pros they don't pay for equipment. So the only people that would play the shorter hitting equipment would be tour pros. So all of the manufacturers would have to take those costs and pass them on to everybody else. So we would all be paying for the professional golf equipment. You know, the one thing I think that the world's gotten wrong about the advances in technology is so-called tiger-proofing golf courses. Every effort they've made to tiger-proof, they tiger-preference golf courses, not tiger-proof them. If you want to tiger-proof a golf course, just take a page out of the TPC Sawgrass. Again, that's why I have so much respect for it. It's not a long golf course. For that matter, nor is Riviera. It's not a long golf course. And it was difficult for Tiger to play well there because of the design elements into it. So I used to be for a rollback, absolutely. And then I spent an inordinate amount of time looking about has the game materially changed? And I couldn't find in any way that the game had materially changed. yes, players are longer. They were longer in the 60s than they were in the 20s. But it's never been the case that long hitters who also hit it straight didn't dominate. Sam Snead dominated.
Sort of the point, right? Like,
It's always been the case that short hitters could compete, and if they were amazing, they could get their share. Lee Trevino did fine. Okay. Calvin Pete did fine. Tom Kite did fine. Fred Funk did fine. David Toms, Matt Kuchar.
Colin Morikawa.
He's doing fine. But he's never going to beat Tiger Woods. Never. And they're never going to beat Jack Nicklaus. They were never going to beat Sam Snead or Bobby Jones or Ben Hogan. Because if you hit it long and straight, you're going to beat people. And the game hasn't materially changed in that aspect. So, and again, I think the best definition or the best analogy I can come up with for changing the game is none of the 50 million golfers in the world are for rolling the golf ball back. And when I say none of them, I mean, yes, there's a few hundred that are in favor of it. Okay, a few hundred, maybe. It is a very cliquish.
Some of which have microphones, right? So that, changes the perception.
It's a very, very cliquish, small group of people, architectural people in architecture geeks, a few notable players for sure, but 50 million people are not for it that play the game. None of the PGA professionals, golf professionals in this country are for it. And the vast number of professional golfers are not for it. The vast number. So in my estimation, there's roughly 10,000 professional golfers in the world that play the game for a living. If you go look at the Japanese tour and the Australasian tour, the women's tour, the Korean tour, you add all those numbers up, it comes to around 10,000. There's 50 million golfers. Divide 10,000 into 50 million, and you get 0.0003. And to me, that's wanting to drain an Olympic-sized swimming pool because somebody spit in it. It's looking for, it's a solution looking for a problem, and it's pointless, and it hurts everybody in the game of golf, except a few people who think that the game would be marvelously transformed into some other time period than the current one where the game was better. And that's always been the argument. That's always been the case. And meanwhile, they've not raised the rim in basketball. In other words, they've added a 3-point line. They're all for offense. In football, they let receivers wear gloves. Ruined the sport, in my view. Ruined the records. Absolutely abolished all the records. The completion percentages of the 50s, 60s, 70s mean nothing because guys can do one-handed catches because they get those sticky gloves on. It ruined the wide receiver numbers, all of that. But what did it make better? Offense, excitement. I'm not saying that there's been anything come along like the sticky gloves in football and golf. But maybe those, people who take the other side of it would say it is the big-headed driver or the golf ball. But it's made the game more exciting, more fun for recreational golfers, and it hasn't materially changed the game at the professional level.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing is you saying, like, basketball has changed, like, materially the way that it's played, right? Like, there's way more 3-pointers that are shot, right? Like, I found it to be a much worse product than it was, when I was a kid. There's no post-ups, but what you're saying is, yeah, the scores might be lower or the players might be longer, but you're saying the sort of formula that produces that number has not changed.
Who's the longest, straightest hitter in the game? It is Scotty Scheffler. He dominates. He dominates in a way that everybody who argues for a rollback says couldn't happen because the equipment has made it very hard to separate yourself. Well, I find it somewhat ironic that the greatest 2 separations in the last 40 years have happened in a period where people say it's impossible to separate yourself in the game. Nobody separated themselves like Tiger. Well, the numbers for COR and the numbers for MOI, they were well in effect in 2003. It didn't stop Tiger Woods for separating himself from 2003 to 2013. And it hasn't stopped Scotty Scheffler. And in that period, Rory's had great runs, and Spieth's had great runs, and Brooks Koepka's had great runs. So players are clearly able to separate themselves in dominating ways with this equipment. And it's still about who hits it the longest and straightest, first and foremost. It's still about who hits their long irons the best, first and foremost. And then the other factors of the game matter less so, but they still matter.
My last question, I could sit here all day and pick your brain. I'm really enjoying this. My last question for you, you posted some very interesting statistics about putting and about, make percentages. And I saw some, anytime you post something like that, there's a strong blowback. I saw some numbers saying, well, that doesn't take into account, maybe they were calibrating shot length, and, maybe pin positions have gotten harder, and maybe greens have gotten faster. But I think the core of your point was, all of this coaching and aim point and all of these devices haven't necessarily made these, geniuses better. Do you believe that? Do you believe that the modern player is overcoached?
Well, first of all, that's not the first time I've posted that. And I've said it on the air, and I've used it on the air. And I've posted, I didn't cherry pick 2005. I've used every single year. It's just that the first couple of years of shot length, and that's 2003 and 2004, the numbers looked a little dubious. I don't know that they were, but they didn't look like they were correct. So I used 2005 because I could go every single year. I could have done that. But if you'll notice in that tweet, I didn't add any commentary to it because I was interested in the commentary that I would get back, because there are so many possible contributing factors to the outcome of those numbers. I would argue that the greens are better, that agronomy is better, that you're able to tap down spike marks. And if you believe in the virtues of Sam Lab and highly specialized coaching in putting over the last 20 years, and the validity of aim point and the green reading books that are available to some degree. Obviously, they can't carry them out on the golf course, but they can look at them at night before they go out and play, et cetera, et cetera. You'd think that there would have been at least some substantial improvement in putting. It's curious to me that there hasn't been. So I was just curious at some of the commentary. People were saying that the hole locations were harder, more difficult. Maybe that's the case. Greens are faster. I would be curious at what speed, what is the optimal holing speed of greens? To me, it's smooth, fairly fast greens. But that was just one particular tweet that I put out that I was literally interested in the comments. I just wanted to see what people in the game thought about that. And there were some interesting, Justin Ray's always an interesting follow. He didn't tweet this, he just messaged me. He took out, because in 2005, they didn't have shot link in the US Open and the Open and the PGA. And he took out those numbers for 2025 because they did include the US Open, the Open, and the PGA. And the numbers more accurately lined up, although there was still a slight impoverishment in 2025, but it was closer to even. But either way, if they haven't gotten better in 20 years, I found that very surprising. I chart every shot that's on TV, and I make notes of when somebody's using aim point and whether they make it or miss it. And look, if I ran aim point, and I'm not saying that it's, I don't know. What I'd like to see is the data. If I were in charge of running aim point and Daniel Rappaport came to work with me, I would log your last year. I would log your last 3 months in very specific criteria. Then I would log the next 3 months after we start working together, and I would log the next year. And then I would log 2 years down. And because I would want to know objectively if what I was showing you was helping. And I would do that with every single player so that I objectively can say it makes everybody better. It makes 75% of the people better, 52% of the people better. And they specifically improve in this area. I would want to know that data. I'm curious as to why that data doesn't exist.
We can leave it at that.
That's curious to me. why that data doesn't exist.
Well, I just want to thank you for coming on. This has been a hugely illuminating, 40 minutes we've been going here. I'm going to let you go, but I just want to congratulate you on all of your success. And, people might love you, people might love you less, but they can't say that you're not prepared and that you care about this game and deliver, a product that I think stands above on television. So thank you for all your work, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
That's very kind of you, Dan. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Take care. I look forward to seeing you down the road.
Absolutely.